Crafty friends, it's Jess from JessCrafts.com, and today I'm here with a video featuring 10 cards, 1 kit with the Simon Says stamp April 2018 card kit. Just going to briefly show you the contents of the kit. The kit though is sold out, so this is mostly for people who already have the kit. There's the large stamp set, the 2 Distress Oxide inks in Squeezed Lemonade and Mermaid Lagoon, a Distress blending brush, which is brand new, although a lot of stores are stocking it now, and I was able to pick up some from Cat Scrappiness. There is the butterfly stencil and the Lawn Fawn rainbow paper. There's just a few sheets of that, which is perfect for the size of the card kit. There's also a whole bunch of cardstock and a piece of Gina foil. One of the reasons that I was really drawn to this card kit is because I really liked the stamp set. And if you were to just purchase the stamp set alone, it would be $25, and the whole kit is $35, I believe, plus shipping. So if you really like the stamp set, it makes the rest of the kit a great value. To get started, I wanted to show you how I did some of the coloring. As you had seen in the previous previous clip, I had already had a bunch of the images colored, and I really did just stamp out a whole ton of images and colored them up, so that way as I go to create the cards, I won't have to stop and color an image. I am using the same colors throughout, so once I pick a set of greens, I'm going to continue to use that green every time I look for that color combination. So I am using YG 17, 13, and 11 as my greens. I am going to color my butterflies in a bit of a rainbow pattern, but because they're not linear, the colors, choosing how to put the colors in order was a little bit tricky, and I basically just kind of kept the centers with the warm colors that are the beginning of the rainbow and the outsides with the with the cooler colors that are the outside of the rainbow. I also kind of thought about not making too much of the color in the same place. So like with the yellows, I wanted there to be an orange in between. So the yellow made sense to be the inside of the butterfly there rather than being the outside. So it's kind of that red then to orange pattern. But yet the yellow is still touching the inner part of the butterfly because I want to have the yellow in more than one place. So there's no sort of like exact science to it, but just kind of keeping them in a general rainbow order. And I did lean a little bit towards some softer, more pastel-y sort of colors as I picked my rainbow. I used R14 and 17 as my reds. I'm going to use V25, 22, and 20 for my purples. That is one of my favorite purple combinations. I actually find purple to be a bit tricky to find some color combinations for. I'd picked out a few that were close to each other, like the V, I think it's 06, 09, and I just had a really hard time blending them, but that is one of my favorite purple color combinations, so if you were interested in picking one out, I would suggest that. As I go through, I'm not really thinking about light source or shadows because I'm going to create a lot of clean and simple cards. I don't make super elaborate scenes, so I'm not really worried about there being a consistent light source. Also, I just kind of want to have fun with the coloring rather than stressing too much about where it is because I'm not designing the cards before I color. So even if I were creating an elaborate scene, I don't know what the rest of my scene is going to be because I'm coloring these independent. For my blues, I actually chose a blue-green combination. So I have BG 18, 15, and 13. This makes it look a little bit less like a traditional rainbow, but I personally just really like those colors. I prefer the sort of teals over traditional blues, so again, I just picked what I liked, but you could also go with a blue combination. I think that the B000204 combination, if I remember correctly from some that I have, would be a pretty light blue combination. One of the other reasons I chose not to go with a traditional blue is because I did not want it to blend too much into the sky. If I'm going to have a lot of blue on there and then I'm going to put it on a blue sky background, it would be a little bit more lost perhaps, or a little too matchy. So that's another logic reason there. For my oranges, I'm using YR07, 04, and 02. It took me a long time to find an orange combination as well, and this is one that I like. I do like the YR68, 65, 61, I believe, combination as well. This is just one that I recently was able to complete, and so I've been experimenting with to make sure that I like it. I did not color all of my butterflies in a rainbow pattern. So some I chose just the cool colors or just the warm colors, but it was the same markers. And I just kind of picked different areas for the butterfly. So here you see one of my just warm and just cool butterflies, but it was the same color combinations. I really loved that pattern paper from Fawn. And with that in mind, I decided that I would just use it as the main part of my background, and I would kind of go with my rainbow theme because I have that warm butterfly. I would put it on the warm part of the pattern paper, and I would take my cool butterfly and put him with the cool part of the pattern paper. So one in the top left and one in the bottom right with my saying in between. I'm going to use this keep smiling sentiment quite a bit. I think there are a lot of great sentiments in the kit. Some of them are a little bit bigger than others, so a lot of times I picked my sentiment based off of the size that fit in with the design. I didn't really worry about which sentiment I was going to use when designing, just because I knew that I was going to try to create some general cards that I would then donate or give to friends for encouragement. I am going to do a lot of heat embossing with my sentiments just because it's going to make them stand out a bit more, and since I am doing such clean and simple cards, any little thing that can help them have just a bit more interest and pop works out great. I heated my sentiment a little too quickly there. I didn't let my heat gun get nice and hot, and so it did warp my paper a bit, and that's a general tip, is to just let your heat gun be hot before you bring it to your paper. You'll get less warping. Also, hold your paper off of your work surface so that the heat has somewhere to pass through, and that can help as well. I'm going to add a bit to the sentiment. This one says, I believe, stay strong. So keep smiling, stay strong. One of the reasons I, again, was attracted to the stamp set was the sentiments, and that stay strong is one of the messages that Cards for Hospitalized Kids encourages you to use for their cards. They think that that is a positive message that, you know, the children that they're sending cards to are sick, but to say something like get well, feel better doesn't really work because sometimes their prognosis isn't such that way, but staying strong is a good and positive message in that situation. Next up, I wanted to do something with one of these butterfly trails, but they're quite large and do take up a substantial part of the card, so I kind of knew that I'd have to design a card around them a bit. I also spent a long time with my coloring, and I think that made me lean towards a few more clean and simple cards, but also I just thought that the stamp set was really beautiful. So again, I felt like I could just kind of lean on the beauty of the stamp set and not have to create as elaborate of cards. So this one's going to be incredibly clean and simple. I'm just going to stamp the butterfly trail as well as the sentiment. I will heat emboss both of them. I'm going to put clear embossing powder over them as I heat emboss them. This is because I find that black embossing powder tends to stick where I don't want it to, and this is just as easy and just as simple as using black embossing powder to stamp it in VersaFine ink and then cover it in clear embossing powder. I find that clear embossing powder is a bit more versatile too, so I would rather just use the two different inks, Versamark when I want it to stay clear and VersaFine when I want it to stay black. So this time I'm going to try to do a better job of actually letting my heat gun get hot. That is always tricky when I'm videoing because then it creates like this 30 seconds of me not doing anything essentially. And so that's why I try to fast forward through the video sometimes because there are those little bits of crafting like that. But again, I made sure to keep the card open so the heat could pass through. I'm going to pick a butterfly to put on the end of the butterfly trail, and I'm going to pop the butterfly up with foam tape. Next up, I wanted to try the brush. I wanted to see if it would give a soft background look. I think the Distress Oxides are beautiful. They blend beautifully, but with the traditional Distress inking tool, I find that it's hard to get really soft, faded out edges. No matter how light I try to go, a lot of times I will accidentally wind up putting too much ink somewhere, or the fade is not as subtle as I would like. So all I did here was try to brush on color into a soft fade with a darker middle, and it worked beautifully. Doing this made me think, like, I really want to go grab a couple more of these brushes. I do think that you could buy some traditional stencil brushes at a craft store and try something similar, and I might try to do a comparison of that, because I don't know that the bristles are particularly different, but I do think the fact that you can control it by making them closer together, but you could do that also by holding the bristles. So I'm not sure that it's necessary, but I will say that I was happy with it and impressed with the results, that it did do what it promises to do. It's a little bit pricier for that purpose than some other stencil brushes. So, if you already have something that works, maybe not a good reason. But I'm also going to use it with a stencil later so you can see the other promised function of the stencil brushes. I'm going to again just stamp a butterfly trail. This time I am not going to heat emboss, and that's because I am using the Distress Oxide ink in the background, and it will take a little bit to dry, and embossing powder will stick to that ink until it is completely dry. And since I was a little bit anxious to just kind of get going with the card, I decided that I would just stamp it with the VersaFine and let it dry like that. I think that the VersaFine ink stamps a really crisp, dark impression the first time almost always, so I usually don't have to worry about that, but you could, of course, use a stamping tool to guarantee a better impression. And again, I'm just going to pop up the butterfly with foam tape because I am doing such clean and simple cards. Just like the embossing powder adds a touch of detail, so does a bit of foam tape and a bit of dimension. Next up, I wanted to take advantage of the fact that I had 2 inks in the kit. As you can see, I'm primarily trying to use things from the kit and not add much extra. Of course, I did add the markers for coloring, and I think that generally that's sort of okay by my rules the sort of self-imposed rules, because I figure everyone has some sort of coloring medium that they prefer to use. But I try not to add too many extra inks outside of black, for instance. I saw a lot of beautiful rainbow inked cards with the kit, and I think that I will create those. I just didn't want to do it for this video because I wanted to show you what you could create just with the kit contents, if you did not have all the Distress Oxides, for instance. Anyway, I wanted to stamp the 2 colors in a pattern with the solid butterflies because Distress Oxide inks stamp pretty well for solid images. I knew it would work out, and I also knew that if I layered the butterflies, if I overlapped their wings very slightly, I could get a little bit of a green color in between, and it could be kind of an interesting pattern down here at the bottom of a card. So I'm just going to stamp them in a nice neat row, and my Misty stamping tool or any stamping tool will make that super easy to do. What I am essentially doing is I've put the stamp down in one place, and then I'm scooching down my card base because I'm stamping directly onto my card base here. 3 blocks, I think it is each time, 3 little pieces of the grid, and by being able to be consistent, your butterflies are going to be perfectly spaced. And I could, of course, pull it down a bit more so they don't overlap if that's the kind of look you would prefer. I also had a few times where I got a bit of ink where I didn't want it to, and as I said, this is directly onto my card base. So I'm using a Tombow sand eraser to pick up any of the extra ink. One thing that I will say is a bit tricky about this is I have to change colors each time. So I'm taking my Lawn Fawn stamp chamois and I'm cleaning off the stamp in between each stamping. This can be a little bit tricky because if you leave your stamp too wet, the Distress Oxide ink doesn't hold as well to it. So you want to wipe off your stamp, but also make sure that it's fairly dry before putting on any new ink. And make sure that you got it completely off so the colors don't kind of mesh together and you get a clear, crisp yellow and a clear, crisp blue. I'm going to stamp a sentiment on top of that and then just round the corners to finish off that card. Next up, I wanted to again continue to play with this blending brush. I knew that I was probably going to order more of these brushes. I'm a distress ink fanatic. I know that, so I tend to order a lot of distress products, even if they might not be necessary. But I wanted to only stick with the yellow then in case I decided to, purchase more brushes. I felt like if I put the blue on there, I don't know how easy it would be to get off. I've heard you can wash them though. So I would look into that if you were interested in using less brushes. But now I just wanted to apply the ink through the stencil with the brush to see how that would work out. I will say that I liked the amount of control you could get because you can pull the case all the way down, so you just have a little bit of the bristles sticking out. I felt like that gave me more control. I don't have to mask off the areas that I don't want to show through. This is a delicate stencil, which is a good way to show what this brush can do, because often if I were to be doing this with a traditional distress blending tool, I would have to do this pounce and twist motion to get it through, because if I tried to rub it in circles over it, it would catch all the little bits of the stencil and it would not give a perfect impression. I found that this gave a very crisp impression. I was very impressed. I had tried clarity stencil brushes in the past, and when I tried to brush ink through the stencil with them, they gave a very soft, undefined look, where this gave a very crisp look, which is what I personally prefer. And I find that I'm generally able to achieve that with the blending tool if I mask off all the areas and I do that sort of pounce and push, where I just directly push the ink over the stencil and twist it, as opposed to really rubbing it all over. I hope that makes sense. But it's hard to blend with that. So I think that the key here is once I have a couple different brushes, I'll be able to blend from one color to the next with the delicate stencil, which is what was difficult to do with the traditional distress tool. So even though I could ink through a stencil, the blending was a lot harder and I was more likely to create those circles from the shape of the tool. Next up, I wanted to move back into using some of the pattern paper. So I picked out this relatively simple yellow piece of pattern paper, and I am going to just create some stripe patterns here. I wanted to do something a bit different. I'd already cut the pattern paper with a die and just, put it in the background. And so rather than just placing chunks of the pattern paper, I thought I'd create a little design with the pattern paper to kind of mix it up a bit. So I cut these to be all, I think, about 1/2 inch wide, and then I'm going to lay them right across my card base. For this set of cards, I have been often working directly onto my card base because I am intentionally creating clean and simple cards. I also want to take a minute to apologize for the fact that my voice sounds really rough, like I'm sick, because I am. I have a stuffy nose and a sore throat, and I was trying to get over it before I filmed the video, but this video is just getting later and later, and I thought some of you would like the inspiration, and so I apologize for my voice, and I'm sorry if it is, sorry. I hope that it's tolerable. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, continue to lay those down. I laid it down such that when I cut off the strips on the edge, you would be able to use the little scraps to then create the bottom. So you only need a small strip for the bottom. You don't need a full-size strip. So rather than wasting a full-size strip, I cut off some of the extra and I added it into the bottom there. And then I'm going to continue to cut those off. It can be a little bit tricky to do in camera because I like to try to make sure that I get a really good cut, and so I tend to pull it close to my face. So at this point, I have decided not to finish my cutting. Also, I'm going to stamp my sentiment all the way across one of the strips, so I want it to hang off in a natural way, so I figured it made more sense to stamp it and then cut it off so that it does in fact hang off in a natural way. But of course, you could just stamp over the edge and let your stamp hang off the side, and that would create the same thing. I'm again using that Stay Strong sentiment because I really liked that. I did realize in retrospect that I was using yellow and the Stay Strong message, which does have sort of the connotation of the yellow ribbon for Cancer. And I think that that would in general be like, if you did have someone who you wanted to send an encouraging message like that too, that would be something you could intentionally consider to do. But it wasn't something that I had meant to do. It just kind of happened. So once I have all the edges cut off, I'm going to again just pick a butterfly from all the ones that I had colored and put it down with some foam tape. This is another really clean and simple card that I created just because I really liked that background pattern paper. So I used some of my Cat Scrappiness Wonky Wavy Stitch dies. I cut the pattern paper and I'm going to stamp and emboss, then add the butterfly and just enjoy the fact that there's some beautiful pattern paper in this kit that can be used. Sorry, just lost my whole train of thought on you guys there. So I guess I'll just continue to talk about this card pretty simply. I tend to think it's better to emboss before adding the pattern paper to the card. I don't know why I didn't do that here, probably just because I wasn't sure that I was going to, and it certainly does work, but I did find that when you emboss after it's already attached to the card, you can wind up warping your entire card. Whereas if you were to just warp the pattern paper that you emboss on, because that can happen with embossing powder, you can add a whole bunch of adhesive to the back to kind of flatten it out. But once it's attached to your card, if you do cause too much warping, you really can't do much to fix that. So next up, since I was creating a lot of bright, fun cards, I wanted to try a little bit more of a toned down look, and in order to do that, I decided to just use some of the green foliage that I had cut rather than using one of the rainbow butterflies. And so I just kind of arranged those in the corner and then stamped a sentiment down in the center. I remember the thing that I wanted to tell you. I used my scan and cut to cut out all of these. I did not fussy cut them. There are not dies in the kit, and I don't even know if there are coordinating dies. But I found that my scan and cut could not cut them with just the 0.04 border, and I had to go with a wider border. So I don't know if you can notice that, but these have a wider border than a traditional set of dies. And again, that's just because in order to go around the detail of the butterflies and cut nicely, like you can see in the scan and cut what it's going to cut before it does, and you could see that it was just going to look really rough. So I decided to go with that thicker border, and I thought I'd mention that in case any of you were using your scan and cut. Next up, I wanted to show a fun technique that I've done on my channel before, but I'm not sure that we always think about with our stamps. You can turn your stamps over and stamp with the back of your stamps. I like to do this even better with the Distress Oxide inks, because when I use dye inks to do this, it would often stain the back of my stamps, which I was not a huge fan of. I'm fine with it, but the Distress Oxide inks can give you solid stamping without staining your staining your stamps. So I turned all of my stamps upside down, and I am stamping the back of them. This works well with symmetrical images because it's going to be facing the opposite direction. So this doesn't work with all stamps, but the butterflies are perfect for it. It also will add color to the butterflies, and it works really well with a stamping positioning tool, because now I can position the stamps the correct way, the sort of traditional way, on top, and I will have created myself some yellow butterflies. You sometimes have a hard time when you try this technique. There's not enough of the stamp to make it stick to the block when you face it the wrong way. However, with these butterflies, because there's all the sort of like veining of the butterflies, they actually stuck really well with no extra help. Sometimes you can use a temporary adhesive to hold the stamps to the block in order to stamp the back of them. You just have to be careful with that. Do it at your own risk, of course, because you could get some adhesive stuck onto your stamps, but I have found most removable adhesive is fine. These, though, again, they work beautifully without having to add any of that adhesive because the stamps are so detailed. Then I'm just going to stamp a sentiment down and call that card done. You could, of course, make a whole bunch of those by stamping in a whole rainbow of colors or stamping each butterfly in a different color to add a bit more interest. For my last card, I wanted to use the Gina K foil. I was a little bit confused about why the foil was included in the kit because they didn't give you anything that you could foil with. Like, I had believed that you needed toner to foil, but then I'd heard that you could do it with just adhesive. So I have some what is like score tape. I think it's from Fun Stamper's Journey, though. It's just something I happen to have in my stash. So I'm just laying down some tape strips here, and I'm laying them in a sort of a crisscross pattern, and I'm going to place the foil on top. I found this to be the most successful. I also tried using the glue that I use with my gilding flakes to try to foil with, and I did not like the results. It did not give consistent results and made my stencils super sticky, and I don't know, I just wasn't happy. But here, I put down the strips of adhesive, I put the foil on top, and then I just sort of rubbed it in with a cloth. I felt like that was better. If you rub it in with your nails, you can create scrapes in the foil, which I didn't like. So I recommend using a soft cloth to rub in the foil. And then it just covers the tape completely and creates a crisscross pattern. It's certainly not the most exciting thing, but you could, of course, just die cut your tape as well. So if you get a large piece of Elizabeth Crafts tape or stick it or something else, you could die cut a shape, but there were no die cuts in the kit. And again, I was just trying to stick as close to the kit as possible, and I figured everyone probably has strip adhesive, so I hope that that was an acceptable compromise to show you how to use some of that foil. I'll put a sentiment, pop up a butterfly, and then I'm going to be finished with my 10 cards 1 kit for the April 2018 Simon Says stamp card kit. I hope that you enjoyed this video and got some good ideas. I am going to show you some of the cards here that I created at the end, but I'm also going to make a blog post so that you can take your time and look at each card. If you want to see some more of the details, feel free, as always, to ask me any questions in the comments if something wasn't clear. I think that I probably lost my train of thought a few times in there, being not so healthy. And again, I apologize for my voice, but I hope that you got some great ideas. I do have 10 cards 1 kit videos for many other kits, and some 6x6 paper pad tutorials that might be interesting to you if you like to see a lot of ideas with one set or one group of materials. So I will leave you links to those at the end of the video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials like the ones I mentioned, please subscribe to my channel. I would love to hear your feedback. If you want to just leave a comment letting me know what your favorite card is, that's always fun. And thank you so much for taking the time to stop and watch my video today. Have a great day. Bye.